Welcome back. We are joined again by Larry Johnson, a former CIA analyst who writes on Sonar 21, and I've left a link in the description. So thank you for coming back on, Larry. It's great to see you as always.
Well, always enjoy the invitation and the chance just to chat with you. You know,
Very good. I want to talk about an article you recently penned because, that is on Russia now recognizing that the Europeans are essentially preparing for more than indirect war, a very direct war with Russia. Again, I think this has been a long time coming for more than 12 years now. We see NATO using Ukraine as an instrument to weaken Russia as a strategic rival. Again, we've heard enough comments from top American officials to verify this. And we know that in 2014, of course, the NATO-backed coup was framed as a democratic revolution, but what they really did was build a huge Ukrainian proxy army while sabotaging the Minsk peace agreement. And since 2022, I think all of this has continued. All paths to peace have been blocked by NATO countries, while at the same time announcing that weapons are the path to peace. So incrementally as well, NATO's involvement has escalated, especially when things are going bad for Ukraine. And now we see NATO weapons being used, the NATO intelligence, NATO targeting. The weapons are guided at long range, at least, by NATO satellites, and even NATO contractors pulling the trigger. So, and well, we can say furthermore, unless we are to believe that the drones that attacked St. Petersburg from the Baltic Sea did not transit through airspace or even originate in NATO territory, then then we can say that, these attacks are now also coming from NATO, at least using their territory. So something appears to be changing in Moscow. Perhaps it's the European leaders speaking ever openly about the need to break Russia, mass-produce long-range weapons to strike deeper and deeper inside Russia. I mean, there's no more pretend anymore. And something, as I said, appears to have changed in Moscow. And Putin's speech, I think, was also an indication of where things are heading. I was wondering, what is your take, though, on this speech?
yeah, I've learned to pay attention to Sergei Karaganov. I know he's a mentor of yours. I think it's correct to describe him as a former mentor. At least you worked with him at one point. And Sergei's always been. He gets dismissed by some. Oh, he's just a political scientist, but he's a very thoughtful guy. And he's very good at seeing trends. And so let me pose sort of the opposite case that will reinforce where Sergei's coming from. If the Sinaloa cartel was being supplied with drones and missiles by China and Russia, and as well as the intelligence for hitting coordinates inside the United States, and they were able to launch attacks all along the southern border of the United States and going deep into Texas and into Arizona, New Mexico. The United States would view that as an act of war and would retaliate accordingly. They wouldn't sit there and pretend that it was just some minor border dust-up. Well, that's exactly now what's happening with Russia. And I think that we can see that, let's call it the Anchorage period, where Putin met with Trump, and there was some hope that the United States is engaging Russia, and that there was going to be perhaps a diplomatic exit, or at least something other than force. That's dead, absolutely dead. And that has been announced as well by Sergei Lavrov, among others, that Yuri Ushakov, who's a close advisor of Putin, they've all made it clear that that process is dead. And this goes back to Sergei Karaganov's position. The West has lost its fear of Russia. They assume that we can do whatever the hell we want. We can bomb them, we can kill them, we can destroy schools, and Russia's not going to do anything in return. And so I think Karaganov he's talking a graduated escalation, but nonetheless an escalation. Step one, you start hitting these sites hitting the factories, military sites in those countries to let them know, no, you've now crossed the line. You've hit us, we're hitting you back. I think, and frankly, that ought to be followed up by putting NATO on notice that any surveillance aircraft that are even in international airspace that are collecting information on Russia will be targeted and will be shot down. That the West has got to know that they cannot continue this kind of provocation. Because as Sergei has pointed out, if this continues, the next step is the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And that pushes the world into a whole new direction. But I hope there's nobody left in Russia that harbors the illusion that somehow the West is seeking a peaceful, negotiated outcome. No, absolutely not. The West wants to destroy Russia. They're intent on that. The rhetoric has become more intense. And what's really bizarre is how the media coverage now is really portraying Russia is on its back foot, Russia's suffering, Russia's losing. Oh my God, and meanwhile, what's actually happening on the battlefield is Russia is moving forward in a way that has not moved forward in the previous 4 years. In 2003, 2023, they were focused on Bakhmut. In 2024, Avdiivka, or I may have them reversed, but it was first Bakhmut, then Avdiivka, and then Bakhmut, and then 2025, Pokrovsk. So there was always like one battle that was getting all the attention and all the resources. Not now. There are multiple battles along the line that are taking place and will collapse the Ukrainian line at some point. So the war has changed in tone. That is for certain.
Yeah, it's been so many fictions all along. I mean, I remember when Russia first went in, the main talking point was not just unprovoked, but this full-scale invasion. Even though the Russians were talking to Zelensky about finding a peaceful solution on the first day of the attack. So already in March of 2022, the first articles came out that, well, Russia's already losing, it's running out of missiles within the next 2 to 5 days or something. Then we had the Nord Stream issue. Oh yes, they blew up their own pipeline. Then we had the invasion of Kursk, which was, this is definitely turning the tide now. Russia is losing. Every time NATO escalates with a new weapon, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, we listened to this for more than 4 years now, that that now the Ukrainians are winning. Now they're winning. It's getting more and more absurd every time. But again, the goal is always the same: is to prolong the war, keep it going, and officially the language is, well, we just want Ukraine to negotiate from a position of peace. We want to force Putin to the negotiation table, even though it's the Europeans who refuse to talk to the Russians. It's quite absurd. I mean, anyone paying attention would know that this is absurd, but it's the propaganda is really dialed up, and they think that following these talking points is somehow very patriotic, even though, as you said, we're heading now towards not just war, but such a war could very easily escalate into a war with the use of tactical nuclear weapons. I did notice in Putin's speech, he did refer to Operation Barbarossa of 1941. Why do you think this historical comparison is so important?
Well, the point Putin was making, and so this was an address on Tuesday the 23rd, the day after the 84th anniversary or 85th anniversary of the invasion of the Soviet Union by Russia. And he was addressing the cadets, graduates of military and intelligence and police institutions. And in making that, he was noting that right now Russia is the West is making no attempts to hide its intent to go to war with Russia. They're openly talking about that within 2 to 3 years, we're going to attack Russia. And Putin's point was just very simple. We've been there before. We the Russian people have been there before. We know what it means to face this kind of threat. And while the Soviet Union was not prepared to repel that invasion in 1941, the message I took from Putin was, we're more than prepared. We know it's coming, and we're going to deal with it. That was really, I think he put a notice, put out a red flag that the West should see that you're getting ready to enter a hot zone. And if you follow this, the result will be the same as what happened to Germany and its European allies that attacked the Soviets, and were ultimately defeated. But this time, Russia's not going to sit back and wait to be attacked. Once it becomes clear that the West is intent on following through on this threat, Russia's going to take steps to defend itself. That was the clear message I took away from that speech.
Yeah, this is the important part of that, is if Russia thinks it's going to be attacked, it will not wait for the opponent to attack. I think something like this was mentioned in one of the biographies of Putin as well. That is, he learned early on, if you know a fight is unavoidable, make sure you throw the first punch. I would argue that this is one of the reasons as well. Why? Well, not one of them, but the main reason why they invaded in February of 2022. Indeed.
Exactly. I agree.
Because in November of 2021, the US and Ukraine, they signed this charter on strategic partnership. And at that point, one of the top advisors to the former French president made the point that this signing of this charter made it convince the Russians that they would either have to attack or be attacked. So this is really, the straw that broke the camel's back. And why would they wait for an attack on Crimea or Donbass? So they went in, and but how? But is this what the Europeans are waiting for then? When they talk about we have to prepare for a future war with Russia, is that a Russian retaliation they're talking about? Because if they really think that Russia's going to attack Europe, they would need at least to outline what the objective would be. What exactly would be the purpose of attacking Europe? I can only say one purpose. I mean, unless you believe in these fairy tales of restoring the Soviet Union, but the only purpose would be to restore its deterrent. But is then the goal to go to war?
Well, I don't know if you saw, Putin issued a response to the Germans the other day that was just scathing and sarcasm. Like the bottom line message was, why would we want to invade you and then have to be responsible for a group of transvestite, transgender, blue-haired weirdos? What do we gain from that? Sorry, we don't need that. We don't want that. You can have it. That was his basic message to him. And it was, it went on. It was like, I recall, like 8 or 9 points. I thought it was actually brilliant of him how he presented it, because it was entertaining, but it was also to the point. But Russia has to step back and look at these attacks that Ukraine are carrying out are not being carried out because Ukraine's got the expertise to do it. And the concern is, you've had Ukrainian officials just of late talk about building a nuclear warhead. And there is a report out of a YouTuber by the name of Borzikman. Sometimes his reporting has been quite accurate, sometimes, questionable. But he claims that a recent arrival of a British ship in Odessa carried these yellow barrels that look to be containing radioactive material. I'm sure Russia is now all over that, but you can't put it past the Brits of trying to do something that absolute crazy, that they would run that risk. This is, they are poking the bear. It's like they think that they can throw a punch at Russia and Russia's not going to react. And I maintain that is a dangerous assumption. Russia's been slow to anger, but once they're their dander is up, they're most formidable.
Well, one can understand though why, well, especially the British, because they appear to be with the Germans among the most aggressive one in this war. But one can understand though, because they essentially designed a proxy war almost in the dream scenario during the Cold War, that is to have the Ukrainians and Russians kill each other en masse, and the West would stand on the sideline. And that's essentially what's been created here though. It's a war where the Europeans have said, well, we have to bring this war to Russian territory, which they now have, but Europe is a safe zone. So all the industrial production, all the missiles and drones, which they advertise that they're producing to attack Russia with, all of this is within European or EU territories and British territory. So this can't be touched by the Russians. And essentially the Russians accepted this rule of the game. That is, the NATO countries can now launch long-range missiles and drones deep into Russia, and Russia is allowed to touch NATO territory. I mean, this isn't sustainable, especially now that it's becoming so much more open and larger scale, and also, as you said, the clear indication of intent, that is to fight a war once Russia has been weakened. But I was wondering, how do you see Putin's changed over time? Because last year he was all about diplomacy, anchorage, all of this. Now we don't hear much about diplomacy anymore. The main speeches, they're about war. That is, we will achieve our objectives. We have the military power. Yes, they have keep their arms open or door open for diplomacy, but they quite obviously do not believe that we will go anywhere.
Yeah. No, I think he's been, I don't want to say forced as if it's against his will, but he is cognizant of what the political pressures are, and whatever his personal desires for trying to avoid conflict, trying to avoid escalation, I think he recognizes it's reached a point now where the demands of the Russian public are such that they want stronger action. They want decisive strikes against Kiev, up to and including killing Zelensky, killing Sursky, killing the top leaderships. I mean, the reality is senior Russian officials and generals have been assassinated all along. And there's sort of this attitude, it's time for payback. But not just payback. You've got to cut the guts out of this thing and make it so that the Europeans also pay a cost. So that's why I say, when you listen to people like Medvedev, he's, I think his views are more in line with the majority of Russians than that of Putin. And so Putin in a way is playing a little bit of catch up. Now, I don't deny that the military strategy is not being set by Putin, it's being set by Gerasimov. But again, it's up to, the Russians have not asked me how to fight this war, and I'm not sure my advice would be all that salient. But I think we've now reached a stage where the Europeans are going to must pay a price for enabling this violence. Otherwise, they will continue to escalate it to a point that it will lead to a nuclear strike, and that's the danger. That in an efforts to avoid it, Russia's taking the very actions that will actually make it more possible.
Well, one can understand though the restraint of Putin, because if they now begin to hit back against the NATO country, as Mark Rutte, not to take him too seriously, but would argue, then the response would be absolutely fierce. But these people seem to think this is a computer game of some sort, or at least that there's proper escalation control, that they can do this, and if the Russians retaliate, then they will be able to manage this. I don't think anyone's going to be able to control the escalation once the Russians finally retaliate. But the whole idea is, the Russians do not dare until they do dare, as they did in 2022, and then it's completely unprovoked, and this is the time to stand up, against the new Hitler. It's, we know what the script will look like after the Russian retaliation, which is why it's quite dangerous. But what do you see being the thinking here on the European side, though, because let's be honest, Europeans, yes, they are declaring the intent, but they hardly have the capabilities. So, well, not yet. If the Russians wait much longer, then they might have more capabilities.
Yeah, you use the word there, thinking, implying that the Europeans are thinking, engaged in a rational thought process. I, for the life of me, don't know what they are thinking because it's so illogical that, you step back and say, okay, whether I'm Germany or Poland or France or the United Kingdom, do I need to pay more for oil and natural gas, or do I need to pay less? Is it better for my country if I pay less? Well, in the world of logic, it's better if you pay less. But the choice, in particular with the Germans, is no, no, no. We're going to cut off all ties with Russia, who supplies cheap oil and gas. We will stand by and do nothing while the United States blows up the Nord Stream pipeline, compelling us as Europeans that we now must buy more expensive liquid natural gas from the United States. And in fact, we're going to ban any kind of economic interaction with Russia, which is going to weaken our economies, cause recessions, cause inflation, cause higher unemployment. And you're doing this consciously. They're doing this, they're choosing to do this. And then on top of it, say, oh yeah, and then we're going to take on Russia and we're going to fight it and defeat it. And you're going, let me see if I got this straight. You, like the UK, you can't even fill a football stadium with your army. It's so small. Your once leading edge prowess in the world of maritime operations, that's gone. That's history. Germany, with these factories that once churned out, some of the most leading edge military equipment, are shuttered. And many of your factory jobs are now going overseas to the United States or other places. So here is Europe. They remind me of, think back to when you were in high school or whatever you called the education before you go to college. And there are the sports teams. And the guy who was the star soccer player, football player on that team, when they're 17, 18, strong, virile, quite athletic. Well, now he's 60 years old. He weighs twice what he did back then, can barely run, but in his mind still thinks he's that 17, 18-year-old football player. That's Europe. They still think that they're this military power that dominated the 19th century, and they're not. They're a hollowed out shell of a continent where the military power has been, is really inconsequential. They're in the, if you're going to take them to a dog show, they're in the Chihuahua class, and yet they're wanting to take on Germany, who's in the Rottweiler class. Sorry.
Russia.
Russia, not Germany. My mistake. But Russia's in, I was saying Rottweiler, Germany, but now Russia is the Rottweiler class. I mean, they're this big dog. Europe, a bunch of yappy little dogs that, they have no significant economic resources. They've lost their industrial edge. They're not doing anything that's on the leading edge of science and technology. They're not leading in space. I mean, there's not a single sector you can point to where Europe, you go, yeah, the future could lie with them. They're living on a legacy.